Right, now, August 31 marks the anniversary of the bombing of the South African Council of Churches headquarters, Khotso House in Johannesburg. 19 people were injured in the blasts in 1988 when the apartheid regime attacked the church building for what they said was harbouring anti-apartheid groups. The bombing was executed by Colonel Eugene de Kock of the police at the time. Well, joining us now to talk about that time and the role the church played in the country's road to democracy, I'm now joined by Reverend Frank Chikane. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So tomorrow it'll be 31 years since that near fatal bombing, but when we look at various moments in history, some people will say there were significant moments. Some might point to Sharpeville, some will say June 16, but I guess for the church this was quite a significant moment.
Well, it was an extraordinary year. Remember that that's the year 1988 when all the organizations were either banned or restricted. Even trade unions couldn't operate. You couldn't make an announcement that somebody was detained. It was illegal. So we went to the churches, gave lists, and when we pray for people, we pray them using the names, and that's how people got to know who was detained at that time.
Right.
And we marched in Parliament as well. We didn't march for more than 50 meters, and they arrested like 26 heads of churches, which was quite extraordinary, and of course beat up everybody else who came after us. And that's the same year when I was poisoned. April of the same year, and I nearly died. And then came August, and the building was bombed. Now, this was a professional act. I mean, it imploded. It was standing in between two buildings, and it imploded inside, and the two buildings were left standing.
So they just wanted the
it was
building.
Very professional. And the pain about it, I think it's crude, that the same person who commanded the operation to bomb it is the same who appears to come and investigate.
Right.
And you can see how it was planned. And the next they did was to arrest a member of the Communist Party and allege that that person is the one who was responsible. So they were trying to disguise it and blame communists for it. Well, in fact, this is a Christian country, Christians who led it, and bombed the headquarters of a Christian organization.
It was quite a shift, though. It was state-sponsored terrorism, but it was quite a shift to actually go after church people and a church building.
Yeah.
This must have been quite a jump for them, even them.
Yeah, but it was the SACC became the voice of the people. As I said, all the organizations were best. Nobody could make a statement. If you looked at the leadership of the region today, of that age group who would listen to the General Secretary speaking from South Africa, the liberation movements did the same because that was the only person who could speak. I spoke on behalf of the people of South Africa. That became a real irritation and destabilizing for them. You will recall that during that time, they called the SACC as presenting itself as an alternative government. Now, for a government to say a church organization is operating as an alternative government shows the level to which they hated this organization. But of course, we took care of the victims of apartheid. We took care of prisoners and detainees. At that point, I used to control a budget of 6 million for emergencies and 6 million for legal defense. We used to take families to Khotso House in Cape Town to wait for an appointment to see their relatives at Robben Island. They would come back again and wait for a ticket to come back. We did all that, and people have forgotten about it. But they knew what the SACC was doing.
So the church, and perhaps it wasn't always visible, played a huge role in the road to democracy. 31 years later, do you think that the church today does enough to deal with some of the sometimes political discourse that's playing out?
I mean, after 94, most people thought, the church must just go back to behind the tainted windows of churches and do what is called church. And at that time we said, no, you can't do that. But indeed, the SACC declined by 2011-12. It was almost like dying. We brought it back 2014 when we realized some of us who were former general secretaries of the Council of Churches brought it back because we understood that this moment was critical. And as you would know, from there on, we had the unburdening panel, which dealt with people who had information about corruption and criminal acts in government, who came to the General Secretary to give the information. That's the information we passed over to the Public Protector. That's the information we used to go to the headquarters of the ANC in March 2017 to say to them, based on our information, the government is no more serving the interests of the people, but it's serving the interests of individuals and families. And once you do that, you lose your legitimacy. And we then said to them, if you don't change the trajectory, we'll have no option but to declare this democratically elected government as morally legitimate. It's extraordinary.
In 1988?
Yeah, as we did in 1988. And indeed, the ANC couldn't change that trajectory. And by June 2017, we did adopt a resolution that declared that government morally illegitimate. And from there on, we set up the Convention for South Africa and produced the document called Civil Society Manifesto, which we published on the 19th of March this year. Yeah. And then, of course, the election happened, and we met the president on the 18th and said to him, by the way, we had declared this government morally illegitimate. We need to work on how we stop this rot, this corruption, the pain people are going through, and billions of rands are being used for things that they were not meant to do. And this is the position. So if you asked where the church stands now, I would say the SACC has taken a position that says it doesn't matter who's in power. If you serve your interest and you don't serve the interests of the people,
I want to ask you this, because I've always been curious. We see sometimes political parties hold conferences and so on and so forth. And then we see priests, men of the cloth, standing at the front, blessing these meetings. Are you not meant to be apolitical?
Well, then we must define what politics is about. I would say the church can be not political if politics are about the discourse of producing justice for people. Then that's what we get involved in. I would rather define what you are talking about as party political. Now, when it comes to party political responsibilities, the roles, then the church can play that role. Of course, there are smaller churches, there are mega churches which have one leader who created them, can make a decision, I'm supporting this party or the other. My church, the Apostolic Faith Mission, can't do that because it's so massive. And it has people who belong to different parties. The Anglican Church can't do it. The Lord Catholic Church can't do it. So, in fact, a church that has a presence amongst the people could never take sides with one party against another. We always took sides with justice and against injustice. And that's why I'm saying it doesn't matter whether it's a nationalist party or it is ANC or Democratic Party. The measurement we have is, are you doing justice? And that's the critical issue.
We've run out of time, but very briefly, how do people remember the event, what happened at Khotso House? Tomorrow there's the anniversary. What should we be mindful of as we think back?
I think we should think about the sacrifices people made. People made lots of sacrifices. Lots of people died. Families lost their next of kin. People were tortured. People were dumped in rivers dead. People were dumped in the sea, struggling to create a new society. I mean, even the ordinary security person who was in that building and the cleaner, those are the people who got injured because they were serving a cause. And I think whenever we remember about these days, we need to remember that we cannot behave the way we like in terms of the government. We need to make sure that we serve the interests of the people we struggled for.
Reverend Chikane, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more for you, including business news and job creation. Stay with us.